Welcome to Real People, Real Life, where everyday conversations lead to extraordinary insights. We're all about digging into the lives of regular people who've achieved success on their own terms. From business and entrepreneurship to fitness, politics, education, and beyond, we cover it all. This is Real People, Real Life. And now your host, Ryan Chereau.
Well, appreciate you coming out, flying all the way from Silicon Valley and joining the podcast. Introduce yourself to the audience so they know who you are.
Yeah, I'm Noah. I'm an electrical engineer at Tesla, and I live and work in Silicon Valley.
That's difficult. Silicon Valley. It's cheap there, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, very cheap.
Very cheap, yeah. You get a nice cardboard box down by the river for about $1 million.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Excellent. So electrical engineer. How old are you?
25.
So you're Gen Z.
Yes.
You're a Gen Zer. You're an engineer working at Tesla. Let's go back in time a little bit here so that one of the things we're trying to do is inspire people, especially younger, well, all generations, but Gen Z, millennials, there's a sense of the American dream is gone. There's a sense that I can't achieve anything in this expensive society. How far back do you think you have to go where you got your mindset to move towards an engineering degree?
To start moving towards an engineering degree, I'd say I started thinking about that very seriously in very early high school, maybe late middle school.
Okay.
My family was very good at encouraging me to think about not necessarily what do I want to study in school, but what career would I like to have, which I think is an important distinction not enough students make when they make their college decision. And so I was thinking about what kinds of jobs would I like to do? And my parents were good at guiding me in the concept of, do you like math and science? Do you like history, English? What kind of route would you like to take? And so I quickly figured out I like math and science, and it was a quick leap to engineering from there because I didn't want to be a scientist just doing research papers and stuck in the lab all day.
So let's go back to junior high. What was the thought process? I mean, most middle schoolers are not thinking about a career. And what was the thought process as a middle schooler that you were able to identify that, first of all, understand what a career is, and number two, identify what you want to do with your life in that direction?
Well, I think my entire life I was very focused on performing well in school. And what comes next is the logical conclusion would be more school. So once you finish the required school, you can go on to college. And so I feel like my entire life I was very college driven, and my whole focus was always to get into the best college I can. And so that always had me thinking about the concept of what I would like to do once I'm all grown up. And so that really, I don't think there's a specific moment where I was like, okay, now I need to start thinking about what the future will look like for me. And it almost feels like it was just always woven in through my life. I've also been very independent all throughout my life and wanted to be able to support myself, take care of myself, just not necessarily have to depend on anybody. And thinking about college and career early is part of setting yourself up to be an independent person, is planning out your future.
So you had a drive at a young age to be independent.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, are your parents, were they pushing you hard that you had to be an engineer? What was their focus? Are they engineers?
My parents are engineers, but they didn't necessarily push me towards that. It was very much more what would you like to do, but also consider what the marketplace value would be. Sure, maybe you love art, but you also have to have the reality check that you can't go into millions of dollars of debt for a degree in art that will make you, if you're lucky, maybe 30, 40, 50 grand a year. If you're usually the best artists don't actually become worth a lot of money until after they're dead. So that wouldn't necessarily be the most lucrative life path, though I was encouraged, if I do have those kinds of interests, to pursue them on the side, but also make sure I can feed myself and pay the bills.
Okay. And as a young person, a lot of young people will take that directive from parents as, hey, that's just too much for me. I want to go have fun. I want to follow my dreams as the artist or what have you. Did you feel pressure to go to college? Did you feel pressured that you had to get some sort of a degree in engineering or in the sciences?
I believe that I exert the most pressure on myself. So I don't think the pressure comes from my family or from outside as much as it comes from within.
Okay.
I've always been really hard on myself and pushed myself to the point where even I went in university, I was assigned just a counselor. Everybody was assigned a counselor by default. And so I went in one time in tears that I got a low grade on an assignment that I thought I was going to perform better on. And my counselor was like, why don't you get a B in one of your classes this semester? Just to like break down that barrier of having such high expectations of yourself. And yeah, I ended up being able to get more comfortable with not holding myself to such a ridiculously high standard. And I was still able to graduate cum laude with several degrees. So it didn't ultimately affect my performance in the long run, having the ability to hold myself to a lesser standard than I was before. And so that having a high standard for myself really drove me to always do well and push myself and pursue something like engineering and maybe be successful where others might not have been. But at the same time, I've been learning and practicing to also not be devastated if I can't meet my own high expectations.
As a child, did you grow up in a standard two-parent family?
My parents have been divorced essentially as long as I can remember, my entire life. So I guess nowadays the divorce rates are pretty high. And so that is a more common household to grow up in, is a split household. But my parents remarried pretty early in my life. So I've kind of always had like four parents in a sense. And that's been a very interesting experience, having to deal with balancing two different rule sets of growing up. But at the same time, it was a very good experience because I got to see that the world isn't always just one way. You can look at things from different perspectives. You can different things can be important to you, and different things can be important to other people.
Let's define those perspectives. So what perspective would you say that your mom and stepdad gave you versus your dad and your stepmoms?
So their teachings were a lot more strict and kind of, as you alluded to earlier in the conversation, like more of a push to be the best and everything in its place. Everything has a place and everything is in its place. And there's a strict rule set that we live in a society, and there's a specific way to be successful, and it's the best way and arguably the only way. Whereas my dad's household was much more, Yeah, but you should also enjoy your life sometimes. And that's all right too, as long as you're not getting too crazy. You can have a balance between being really hard on yourself and being successful and also enjoying your life and having some fun.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you had parents that were engineers. Was your mom an engineer, your stepdad, your dad?
So, my mom is a scientist,
Okay.
my stepdad's an engineer, and my dad's an engineer.
Okay.
He's a technician, but he does a lot of engineering type work. Technically, none of my parents have any kind of formal engineering training, but both my dad and stepdad do a lot of engineering type work. My stepdad is more automation engineering, and my dad is more mechanical engineering.
What type of science did your mom study?
Essentially biology. Her degree is molecular biology. So she's always been in more of the life sciences.
And college and university for your mom, definitely, to get a molecular biology degree?
Yes.
Was college or university the emphasized path by your mom?
Yes, that is definitely true. She did at one point make the remark that a bachelor doesn't go as far as it used to these days, and that a master's degree might be the way to stand out. But I ended up choosing to just have multiple bachelors as a sort of compromise of both being able to stand out in the marketplace while also not going severely into student loan debt to get the master's.
Okay, definitely student loan debt. That's always been that's a topic we've discussed, and it is a systemic problem. I've mentioned before on the podcast that I think colleges, universities should provide an ROI, a return on investment, before they take the tuition of a student. It seems to be missing. Hopefully, that might be improving. I don't have kids in university, but we have a bunch of people with paper that have no ROI and $100,000 in student loan debt. And they feel the system has let them down. Growing up, when I was in middle school, in high school specifically, college was the only route. We were told that you will not succeed in life unless you go to university or college. And it was interesting that even for me, I didn't go to college or university. I went for 6 months, I think. But before I went, they pulled me into the counselor's office and said, you haven't told us which university you're going to. And I said, I'm not going to university. I was an entrepreneur by heart. It was in my blood, and I was determined to make it in the entrepreneurial world. I find it difficult that when a young person has a great idea, if it is entrepreneurial, they can't even get a $5,000 SBA loan. But they can get a $100,000 college university loan without a blink of an eye.
In a history or art degree.
Yes, that's the whole idea of ROI. And there's nothing wrong with a history or art degree, but I think colleges and universities should be very clear with what that bachelor does. This is the data for history majors. This is the data for art majors. This is the data for liberal arts majors. This is the data for an engineering degree. And this is what the average pay is in this area or that area or wherever you want to live. It should be a very lengthy, detailed conversation with the entrance counselors before they sign the bottom line. It's a huge disservice. And what we see is colleges building and building and building new buildings, it's amazing. These colleges are always under construction on the backs of these student loans. We're seeing the tipping point where students can't even pay their loans back because they're making no money. They're not even using their degrees. Now, I think of it a couple different ways. They were sold a bill of goods that wasn't true. Get a college degree, you'll be set the rest of your life. They weren't given the information, and these are just kids. There's also another factor, is there's the easy way out. And the easy way out is, hey, I can get my college degree if I just take all these easy classes. You didn't take the easy way out. You decided that, hey, I'm good at math, I'm good at sciences. Walk me through the process of picking a school and then picking a major and how that affected you today based on those decisions 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago.
So for picking a major, I had strong feelings that I wanted to be an engineer because it's the closest thing to an inventor. So I like the idea of learning how the world works, but also applying that. So when I was in classes, I would learn a new concept, and then I wouldn't just take the professor's word for it. I would then think about it and think, how can I prove this to myself? And I'd go home and I'd design an experiment and test it out and try to prove the professor wrong to validate the philosophy they were teaching me. A great example was that batteries put in backwards just make negative power. And I was like, there's no way you can just add and subtract that way. So I had a battery operated thing that took 4 AA's and it added up to 6 volts when you had it all packed in correctly. And then I flipped one of them backwards and measured, and sure enough, it subtracted 1.5 volts. I was like, wow, that's crazy. It's only reading out 4.5 now. And so that was a good example for me of how I can actually take what the teacher's teaching and practice it. And that helped me take the hard path because it wasn't just words on paper or words being thrown at me. It was real things to me that I can go and figure out how I can prove it. How can I use this? How can I apply it? How can I build something that uses this concept? So that made it a lot less of a difficult path for me because once I was figuring out ways that I could apply those skills, it became burned in my mind, those concepts. So it was less of I need to sit and memorize these concepts and more like, oh, that's just how the world works and I fully understand it now and I have physically experienced it as well as learned it. For choosing a university, I made a big spreadsheet because I love spreadsheets, and I evaluated what were the best universities across the country for electrical engineering.
How old were you when you did that?
Probably 16.
Okay.
So I originally, for choosing a major, I wanted to do engineering because I wanted to do some kind of inventing with applying the concepts that I was learning. And so I thought I wanted to do software engineering at first because I taught myself how to code on my calculator. And I was like, this is great. You can make stuff with no capital. You don't need physical things to make stuff. You can just program them. You can create stuff from nothing. That's incredible. So I got 2 jobs simultaneously. One was I created an app development company at age 16, and I also got a software internship where I was basically debugging code for the lead software engineer at a small company.
Okay, so now the audience just went wide-eyed. So 16 years old and you started a company. Now this seems counterproductive to go to college, go to university. Where did you get that drive to start a business?
Well, I had taught myself at age 15, 14, at 14, I taught myself how to program on my calculator. And then I was so excited that I then enrolled at age 15 in my school's computer science class. And I had such a grand time with that I went above and beyond the requirements for the final exam, which was just program something functional that shows you learned something in this class. So I programmed a full-on video game. And through friends and family, that video game got distributed, and through weak ties, it ended up in the lap of the software engineer I had mentioned. And he was like, great, I need an intern, a software intern. And so he reached out and I followed up and got interviews and got hired with the software engineering internship. And then also through the same chain of weak ties, I had someone reach out to me that they wanted an app created. And I was like, yeah, I can make an app. Why not? Like, I taught myself how to program on a calculator, make video games on a calculator. I bet I can figure out an app. Why not? And so I took on these projects. Maybe it was a bit audacious, but I managed to pull them off. And it taught me a lot. And it was absolute hell. And juggling high school and social life in high school and 2 jobs, and one of those jobs being my own company while trying to manage a team. And I ultimately ended up firing everyone on my team. But
That's good for your social life.
yeah. But in the end, it taught me that I didn't want to be a software engineer. And in fact, speaking to the software engineers at my software internship, they said everything that I could learn from university beyond what I'd already learned, I could just look up online. And so they advised me do a different kind of engineering. And I was not enjoying my experience of overexerting myself within the software world. And so I also was turned off from software engineering at that point. But it's a super useful skill that I use all the time still, but just dabbling. And I thought, hey, the whole world runs on electricity. Electricity is basically the closest thing we have to magic. So I would love to learn about that. And you can get a job anywhere with electrical engineering in today's world, because even oil rigs and, like, let's say gasoline was suddenly the only product we use, well, they need the lights running. So, like, I saw a future, no matter what the way the world went, I would always have a future in electricity at the very least. But my passion, from elementary school, my passion has always been in solar. So when I saw that of the top universities I was looking at, the university I ended up attending, the Oregon Institute of Technology, they offered a program where you could do simultaneously the renewable energy engineering degree and an electrical engineering degree and get done in only 5 years instead of the typical 4 for one degree. That was a no-brainer to me.
So you decided to take the easy way out to get a college degree and get 2 bachelors in engineering.
I ended up doing so much engineering that it became almost a shoo-in to just get a math minor as well.
So you decided math would be fun as well.
Yeah, I just took a few extra math classes and I was given a minor in math. And so I have 3 pieces of paper from my university experience.
And all of them functional.
Yes.
Let's go to the mindset. So what a lot of people listening are probably thinking, okay, well, he's special. He just seemed really easy for him. And I don't believe that to be true, because although you have a confidence that you have in this industry, you had to have doubts, you had to have difficulties about your ability to achieve 2 degrees and with a math minor. What was your process to overcome those negative thoughts when you were getting beaten down?
I would say that really I wouldn't have made it through university if it wasn't for my friends. My best friend was a really good note taker. I'm a horrible note taker. And I will just sit and absorb every word that the professor says, and I'll ruminate on that and understand the concepts. But then when it comes to an exam, I have to rebuild all the concepts from scratch, which works, but when you're under time pressure, it's not so great. So I depended heavily on my friends to help me study using their notes and things. And we would do little study sessions right before an exam and sit at a whiteboard and run through just theoretical problems. And I would be able to build up from nothing just based on what the professor had told me, nothing being no notes.
Mm-hmm.
But having the help of people who had really good notes so they could highlight, like, hey, what about this concept? What about this? The professor might ask about this other thing. I knew the concepts, but I didn't have them in a nice list where I could quickly reference and be like, oh yeah, that thing also might come up. So I really think that I wouldn't have made it if it wasn't for my friends.
So you work for Tesla. You mentioned that earlier. Is that something, one of many companies that you had your eyes on as you were reaching graduation?
I've been a huge fan of them for well over 10, 12 years. Ever since I learned about the Model S, I was obsessed. And I thought it was the coolest concept that you could run a car on just electricity and that it's dead silent. You can't even hear it other than the wind as it whispers by you.
Hmm.
And I became completely fascinated by the company to the point where when they unveiled the Model X, the SUV, with the falcon wing doors, I managed to convince my mom, who was in the market for a sports car at the time, that this is the way to go. And especially that at the moment it was the fastest production vehicle on the market. So that was a good selling point as well.
And that kind of aligns with your renewable energy engineering degree as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think that your primary focus is renewable engineering, or a balance of both electrical and renewable?
I do actually a little bit more automation engineering in my actual job, a little less electrical engineering, but my electrical helps me understand some of the nuances of why the machines are the way they are. And my renewable energy helps me understand the chemistry and battery department way better than some of my friends that work in the battery department.
So some of our younger people out there going, okay, here's a guy with a couple engineering degrees, working for reportedly one of the toughest bosses out there, and you must not have any kind of a social life or no time for yourself. Um, would that be a true statement?
I have time. I perhaps have less time than someone working just a regular 9 to 5. However, I don't mind at all. Um, for me, it's important for some reason to me that I leave at precisely 5 p.m. Unless I'm working on a project and really focused on it, then I'm enjoying that so much. That becomes my priority. But I have no care in the world what time I come in. So if my boss wants me to come in at 6 a.m., I'll do that as long as I can leave at precisely 5 p.m., which then has me doing maybe like a 10, 12-hour days sometimes. But I don't mind as long as I leave at precisely 5.
So when you do leave, what does your life look like?
Right now, it mostly just looks like going home.
At least you have a home to go to in Silicon Valley.
That's true. I live in an apartment and I am living alone in my apartment, which I've come to learn is like very, very rare, extremely rare for especially my age group. As you mentioned at the beginning, there's a sort of sentiment that for young people, the American dream is dead or that you cannot make it on your own. And perhaps it's not as easy as it once was, but it is possible. You just have to make that your priority. And that is something that is one of the most important things to me. I believe firmly in the American dream, and it is one of my core values, and therefore I will fight to make it true for my own life.
When you set a goal for yourself and you run into the inevitable pitfalls, failures to achieve a certain step, What is your mindset in getting through to the next level?
I usually don't think about it too much about the fact that I'm stuck. I think about what needs to be true for the next step to be true. So if I'm stuck, I think about what is the problem I'm experiencing and what would a future look like where that's not a problem? And what would be the pieces of the puzzle that make that true? An example might be if I wanted to fill this water bottle, to make it true, I need some kind of source of water. What are some options? Rain, tap water. Maybe I could purchase a method to extract water from humidity. Perhaps I could invent something that extracts water from humidity. Perhaps I could desalinate ocean water. I think about solutions that would be able to allow me to achieve the thing I'm trying to do. I think if you think about the problem itself too much, rather than the solutions to the problem, then you'll get hung up easily.
A lot of people would define that as a defeatist victim mentality. Oh, I can't do this because whatever, you can fill in the blank. And people put a lot of self-imposed restrictions in their path to success, rather than looking internally and saying, okay, I have the power to make change, however small that might be. I call it directional decision making, or getting out there and saying, okay, I might not have all the answers right now, but I know that I need the water or whatever the problem is. What are my options? They may be all question marks, but to move towards those options will unveil the question mark into a potential answer. When you were going back to the crazy life you were living as with your your software company, having to fire all your employees. How old were you when you were doing that?
16 or 17.
Did you make any money?
I did make money, and I thought I was hot shit for a high schooler because I made, in a lump sum, I essentially sold the app for $14,000. And I did have one close friend who stayed on through most of it. But he even felt guilty about getting a cut of the pay. But I still felt like he put in enough work that I still paid him $3,000 of the 14, which left me with 11,000. And I thought that was the largest amount of money I'd ever had in my life at that point.
Did it give you a new perspective on the ability to earn?
It gave me the confidence that I can do things that I believe I can do. It helped reinforce my audacity.
A lot of people think the only way to make money is to work for somebody else, provide a product and or service, an app in this situation that somebody found valuable in a dollar amount of $14,000, and conclude the project. That's a big lesson that a lot of people don't learn. And I think I think that it adds to the dependency of having to work for somebody in order to have money and or stability in your life. That is obviously what most people do, but that was very entrepreneurial, which is obviously something that I'm interested in. The ability to fill a gap, fill a need, and generate your own stream of income. Is this something now you currently work for a company? Do you still have that desire?
I constantly have this burning fire in me that I want to be entrepreneurial. I get often discouraged by how little money I'm able to generate doing my personal entrepreneurial ideas, but I think it's just a matter of I don't have enough practice making real money doing entrepreneurial pursuits. I will say it took me a year to make that app and I earned $11,000 at the end of it. So that's $11,000 a year, which is I could have made more working at McDonald's.
Great.
But I earned maybe about that doing my software and probably a little more actually doing my software engineering internship simultaneously. But I was significantly more proud of the money I earned with my app company than the money I was earning in just a paycheck. That felt like a shoe-in money, whereas the money that I earned from the app felt like I really earned it.
Do you feel like the value lies in the experience and the knowledge gained?
Yes, the experience was one of my foundational experiences. It's something that will stick with me for my entire life. I honestly sometimes forget about the software internship because it was just a job. And the app development was such a formative experience for me that it will be something I remember for my entire life.
What could you tell people out there who want to achieve more in their life? They feel stuck. They don't know what the next step would be. What would be step one in that process of identifying what it is that they should be doing rather than what they are doing?
From talking to people my age, the biggest problem I've noticed is that not enough people take a page from Nike. A lot of people need to just grow up and just do it. If they want something, they need to just do it. And I think
Why do you think that they don't?
Fear. I think a lot of people are afraid of both failure and success. They are afraid of what does it mean if I succeed and what does it mean if I fail. And a lot of people will think about the failure more than the success. I usually don't even think about the failure as an option, which is I think where my audacity comes from is I just think of I do a lot of first principles thinking, which is, does the laws of physics say this is impossible? If the laws of physics say it's impossible, then it's impossible. If the laws of physics don't prohibit it, there's no reason it can't be done, which does lead me to think I'm capable of significantly more than I perhaps am able to do. I've come up with a lot of ideas that end up ultimately being failed ideas, but I'm glad I try them because nothing about the laws of physics say it won't work. So I just try it.
In my opinion, that's a better well-lived life to have a lot of experiences if you can put the fear aside. Now, fear is a real thing. It's evolutionary. It's a core function of us surviving for all of these thousands or millions of years. And sometimes it's very deep in people, and it comes from a lot of different areas. It could become from personal experiences, could come from external forces, could be the way you were raised. Maybe your parents were fearful of taking chances and or risks. How does somebody break out of that if they are so trained in their thought process that failure is inevitable, success is impossible, and the best path is safe? It's better to be safer than sorry.
One of my closest friends told me, if you can think of the most realistic worst case scenario and you're okay with that, you can handle that, there's no reason you shouldn't try. And that has really stuck with me. I was told that in early high school by my friend. Um, that friend, ironically, he's afraid of trying a lot of things.
Pure
but,
irony.
but I think those words have helped me more logically evaluate whether it's worthwhile to pursue something. Whereas my approach a lot of times when I was younger was more to do it before I feel the fear.
Yeah, fear is a function of a lack of information. And your brain, which is very creative, always working out the worst case scenario that if I do this, I'm going to be in the worst possible situation. So I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to succeed. Overcoming that fear in my life has always been a function of, okay, I'm scared of this thing that I want to do. So let me break it down. I need to know more information about this thing. It is actually, it drives me like the two voices in your head, the one that's telling me, oh no, don't do it. That's scary. That's not a path you want to go down. It's dark and that's scary. And there's monsters down that road. And then I say, okay, well, let's look at the engineering plans of that road. Let's see why it even exists. Why is the road there? Who built it? How is it built? Why was it built? And I find I don't use the physics analogy, but the analogy that I use is when I look around is other human beings have succeeded in this area. I'm a human being. So then I'll examine their life, learn from others, and say, what did it take for them to achieve the same goal that I would like to achieve? And then my personality is I want to do it even better, which is also the human condition, right? We're always bettering ourselves. That's why technology increases and the quality of life increases, because we just are not static creatures. We want to better ourselves and society and on ideas of people before us. So fear, you nailed it correctly, is the number one thing that holds people back. When you have the voice in your head, do you ever telling you can't do it? How do you get it to quiet down?
I don't know that I get that voice very often.
I do.
I think that's where I'm maybe too confident in my own abilities, especially if I've seen that it can be done.
How have you built that confidence?
Probably trial and error. An example would be I once had a job for the summer doing I got hired doing a control system, and I was asked if I would be capable of doing the project, and I was not sure if I could until I was told a company was hired and they did it for one of the locations. And I said, as long as I can see what they did, I'm confident I can replicate it. To your point, I'm also a human. If humans have done this project, I'm sure I can figure it out. And sure enough, I figured it out, and then I replicated it across 7 different locations.
Now, a lot of people with that kind of confidence would have to admit to a lot of mistakes and in the process. Would you agree that because you have the audacity, as you spoke about, and you just jump into it, do you feel you're taking a harder path, a lot more mistakes to get to the final product?
As satisfying as a successful final product is, I think mistakes are critical. You have to make mistakes. Mistakes have such a negative connotation within our society, and they really shouldn't. If you're not making mistakes, you're not learning and you're not innovating. You're not figuring out how the world really works. If your life is perfect all the time and you never make a single mistake, I almost wouldn't trust you as a person, because you don't know how life really is. You don't know how the details of how something works. If I was to, say, design a circuit and it worked perfectly, that's nice and all, but if it breaks, I'm going to have a hard time troubleshooting it. But if I make a bunch of mistakes while I'm designing it, well, now I've encountered a lot of ways it can go wrong. And so when I see something similar in the future, I can think, oh, I've seen this before. I know exactly what's wrong with this system.
Somebody very wise gave me some advice in 2001. I decided I'm going to learn how to fly an airplane.
That's a great year for flying.
I know, exactly. It actually was. We'll get into that on another podcast. That was an interesting year. But I was very, very hard on myself about perfecting, and I don't like that word, but perfecting the art of flying. And I would make mistakes. And one of the hardest things in flying is landing a plane. And I was having in my mind, a very, very difficult time mastering that skill. And I was getting pretty down on myself. And my instructor in our debrief afterwards had a very wise thing he said to me. He said, Ryan, I see you get really, really hard on yourself about trying to perfect these landings. And I would rather I prefer the students who make a lot of mistakes while I'm training them than that student who hardly makes any mistakes. He says, because there'll be a day when I'm not in the cockpit with them. And when they do make a mistake, I'm not there to help them and correct them. And it could be a fatal mistake. He says, so I would rather you make all of those mistakes and learn from those mistakes while I'm here to show you the right direction and get you on the right path. And that really stuck with me, that mistakes are not the opposite of success. Mistakes are, in fact, necessary for true success. And you're right. I think society has really put a bad connotation on the word mistake. Hey, you're making mistakes. Think about it right from school, elementary. You don't want to make a mistake. You make a mistake, you're reprimanded. It's taught to us from a very young age, rather than utilizing those mistakes as a tool to move you towards eventual success. So your grasp on that is very refreshing.
I believe there's a certain level of reprimanding that is important, because a mistake shouldn't be accepted as a success, but it should be used as a tool to learn from. And so if you can point out, hey, that's wrong, but here's why, and here's how you can correct it, I think that's what's important. I think, unfortunately, a lot of times it's more of, that's just wrong and that's bad. And instead of that, I think it'd be more valuable to say, and here's why, and here's how you can fix it.
Growing up, who would you say was your biggest influences on your life and your decision-making process to help you become who you are today?
I take a lot of inspiration from my family. That is also where I think I get my philosophy of not thinking that I can't do something. So I think instead of thinking, oh, I can't do that, I think I can figure that out. I don't know how to do that right now. I have some ideas of how I might be able to do that. But I know that ultimately I can figure it out. And I think that's an important distinction that helps keep me going when I'm going through a difficult problem, is that I know that I can figure it out. And the inspiration is because my grandfather moved across the country from a young age and built a life essentially from scratch. My father ended up blowing up his life by accident around the 2008 housing crisis. And just as many experienced trouble during that time. And he rebuilt his whole life from scratch. My stepdad moved here as an immigrant with nothing, not even speaking English. and he learned by watching Seinfeld how to speak English. And but now he's a very successful engineer. And so I've seen countless examples from within my own family that you can start from the bottom and build yourself up. And that's why I'm so passionate about the American dream, because I have countless examples within my family. And then even a more recent example is my uncle spent his whole life in prison, and he just got out and he's in his 50s, and he just hit the reset button as if he built a whole brand new life. He's a successful, he's got a successful business. He's got a beautiful wife, a kid. Like, he just rebuilt his whole life from scratch at the age of 50. So that gives me the confidence that no matter how badly I mess up, I will always be able to rebuild my life from scratch. And let's say I don't like the direction my life's going, I can just start over. And I'm very confident that I can be successful in life at any moment.
And that speaks to failure isn't the end.
Exactly.
Failure is a beginning.
Failure should be an inspiration to yourself. You should learn from it and learn, how did I get here? What caused the failure? I'm not going to do that one again. And where do I want to go? Where am I going to go from here? The nice thing about failing, there's not a lot more places you can go. You've kind of hit rock bottom. And so once you're at the bottom, it's cliche, but you can just keep going up from there.
Yeah, improvement is pretty quick to get in your grasp when you're already at rock bottom.
Yeah.
It seems like you've had some really good examples close to you to know that it is reality and that you can survive when times are tough, and life will throw curveballs. That's going to happen. There is no straight line to success. It has many turns, many twists, many ups, many downs. And speaking of success, so you're 20, you'll be 20, you're 25?
25 currently.
Okay. At 25 years old, you've been on the planet a quarter century.
Yes.
How would you today describe success?
As someone in my mid-20s who's graduated university, I believe, I understand that it could be an unrealistic standard and that different people have different life paths. And I have several friends that don't have the same life path as me, but I do regard myself as being very successful in that I have 3 degrees from my university. I have my dream job, a company that I've been very passionate about for over a decade of my life, and I get to work there and be part of it now. I live on my own and support myself and pay my own bills. To me, that is success at this point in my life. And that is something that I am really proud of. And I didn't get here easily. I definitely had my fair share of adversity. When I was in university, I had some struggles paying the bills, and I even had a point where when COVID first struck, all my roommates moved out, and I was depending on them to be able to pay my mortgage. And I was working part-time minimum wage, and my hours got cut to $8 hours a week.
Okay, wait a minute. You said mortgage in college, so walk me back on that one. What do you mean mortgage?
Yeah, when I was 19, I started looking around and I realized, I'm paying $2,000 a month for a dorm room at the university, but my college town is so affordable that if I was to take out a mortgage on a house, it would only be a couple $100s a month. And so when on my 20th birthday, I reached out to a real estate agent that had been recommended by a friend, and I started working with them, and I worked to purchase a house, and I evaluated the market and decided that that city was just constantly improving itself, and the values of the houses were going up, and the university was improving itself, and the people were drawn to the area by the university, and people would fall in love with the area and want to stick around. So to me, that was all signs that buying a house will just be an investment that goes up in value. And I was earning just enough to be able to qualify for a mortgage. And the housing was quite affordable in that area. My house was only $130,000. And so
New house?
it was over 100 years old.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's still
But
pretty new then.
I love the olden days architecture. They really put a lot more character into houses back in the day. Nowadays, it's a lot more cookie cutter, which gets more housing out there, which helps meet the supply. Fair enough. But I just feel there's that old world charm with the older architecture. But my aunt told me a great joke that says the only thing that works in an old house is the owner.
That's true.
So I did have a lot of problems with the house, had to change pipes, change out floors, things like that.
So a lot of people are going, okay, 19, 20 years old. Yeah, that's great. You wanted to buy a house. How do you get the finances to do that? Was that money given to you by your parents? Did you have money in the bank?
Well, I definitely finessed it.
Okay, let's talk about your
So
finessing it.
the bank told me I needed $5,000. I negotiated with the seller that they would cover half. And so I only needed to come up with $2,500 to buy this house at the end of the day. So I stopped paying my tuition for a couple months so that I could build up the savings to then buy a house. And then I also, because it was in the middle of the school year or the semester, it didn't like go into collections or anything before I was able to buy the house. And then shortly after, the school sent the tuition into collections. And then I was able to quickly turn around and save up after I got roommates to then throw money at paying that off quickly.
So you got the house, you got some roommates. I'm sure they were happy to get out of the dorms.
Right.
And did that allow you to cover the mortgage?
Yeah. So my mortgage was only $600 a month. And with property taxes and stuff, it came out to $900 a month. And then I also had PMI because I only put $2,500 in closing costs. And so I put $0 down on the house, essentially. So I ended up, my monthly payment for the house was $900 and then about $300 for utilities. I was renting each bedroom for $500 a month, and I had 3 bedrooms, so $1,500 a month of revenue and about $1,200 a month in expenses. So I was actually technically getting paid to live in my own house. And then when times got tough, I ended up moving into my closet. As I mentioned earlier, when COVID struck, all my roommates got scared and they moved back home with their parents and took a break from university. And suddenly I was on the hook for the full mortgage amount and utilities and everything. So I can control utilities. So I turned off everything. I unplugged everything from every outlet. I unscrewed light bulbs. So
Just like when the house was built 100 years ago.
Yeah. I took out all the light bulbs. So there was only a single light bulb for every single room. So if you turned on the lights, you only had one light in each room, just enough to be able to move around the room. I turned the heat down as low as it goes. I was in an area that snows, so you couldn't turn off the heat completely, but I turned it as low as it would go. So I would be able to see my breath in the morning in my own house. And I would walk around wearing jackets in my house and wear like a comforter draped over myself just to keep warm. And I put a COVID discount on all my rooms, $400 a room, just to quickly get people in as fast as I could. And then I moved into the attic closet.
So then you have
Four bedrooms to be able to rent out.
See, this is what a lot of people will look at from the outside in and go, oh, this kid, he's got a house, he's got this cash flow. They don't see the whole story. They don't see what it took to actually keep it, the hard times, what you had to do to maintain and sacrifice. And that also goes to life itself. A lot of people are, there's a saying, people are jealous of what you got, but nobody's jealous of how you got there. And so I guarantee you nobody was jealous of how you got there, living in a house where you can see your own breath in the morning.
Well, and that closet is funny too, because it was just barely big enough to fit a twin mattress, and that's it. And the roof was sloped, so you had to crawl into the closet onto the mattress. And I was dating a girl at the time, and I ended up charging her $100 a month rent to share that mattress closet with me. So I got real crazy with the rent.
Desperate times, boy. You're a good salesman too.
Yeah,
you get your girlfriend to pay you to stay at your house. That's hilarious. How did it end up working out for you? You had the house for 4 years. Pretty much, you lived for free.
Yeah, and then at the end, my roommates, towards the end of graduation, my roommates ended up moving out, and I ended up having enough savings to float myself through the end of graduation. Sort of. I did get to the end and have my utilities start getting cut off because I couldn't pay bills. So there was a point where my water got shut off and stuff like that. But, you just keep pushing through, and I took on more hours, took on extra jobs. I ended up working 4 jobs, I believe, in my university, 4 part-time jobs, since because of the COVID restrictions, they were limiting my hours. So I was working as a tutor, a tour guide. I was working doing admissions, and I was working giving, helping people in classes.
And all of this while you're trying to get 2 engineering degrees with a math minor.
Yes.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
Yeah. It was definitely not easy, but it was definitely not boring.
Would you say it was a great experience?
Yes.
Lots of lessons learned.
I learned so much. I hate the saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But at the same time, I wouldn't have traded that adversity that I went through for just having a cushy life in the dorms. I am so glad that I had my water cut off, because now I won't fear that in the future. I know how to handle that situation. I know how to handle my hours and income getting cut down to where I don't know how I'm going to pay the bills. I don't know how I'm going to put food on the table. There was a point where I was so desperate for food that I had to sell everything I had. When I was in high school or middle school, my parents, for my birthdays, got me 2 Tesla stocks, and I had them framed, and I had them with me for years. And at some point I couldn't afford to eat, so I had to sell my Tesla stocks just to eat.
Did you reach out to your parents and tell them you couldn't eat?
I'm too proud for that.
I bet they would have helped you.
Yes, but I wouldn't.
You were determined to do this on your own.
I'm just of the mindset that I want to be independent. I feel disgusting if I ever have to ask for help, to the point where actually one of my bosses in school she found out that I was struggling to eat, and because I was my school had a free food pantry, and that was where I was getting all my meals after I sold everything, but it was just like junk food. And so my boss got wind of that, and she was like, hey, I needed a letter of recommendation from her to go into my master's program. She said, I will sign this if you sign up for food stamps and show me evidence. And so I did end up signing up for food stamps, which I would have been too proud to do if she hadn't pushed me to do it.
Yeah, there's times in life you do need help, and those types of social programs are necessary for your particular situation. Fortunately, there's a lot of people that take advantage, but there are plenty of people that are helped by these social programs. And that is a good lesson you learned, that don't push yourself to the point of destruction because you don't want to get help. When needed, the right help is out there for you. What's the conclusion of the whole house deal?
Well, I ended up selling the house. It had appreciated dramatically.
Your
I
analysis.
did get lucky with the COVID wave of the whole country got a huge boost in housing prices shortly after COVID. But also, I was right in my analysis that the housing market in general in that area was increasing. And I was able to sell my house for $220,000, which after taxes and fees and whatnot, I ended up netting about 60,000, which then was able, well, 70,000, 60 of which I was able to pay off my student loans with, and then 10 of which I was able to use to float myself between graduating and accepting my job at Tesla. I will say 2019 was the year I bought the house, and it's also the year I became officially financially independent. And it's also the most important year of my life to me. I think of that year as the year that I broke up with my parents.
That's actually I've never heard that before.
Because while the relationship is intact, I completely severed and became my own adult at that moment. And it was one of the most difficult things I ever did, but also one of the most important things I ever did.
More people need to do that.
Yeah. I had a plan to do it that year, and the steps of my plan were that I needed to be able to support myself with support a roof over my head. So the action steps with that were buying a house and getting roommates to foot the bill. And I didn't know about house hacking at that time. So I thought I was just real clever. Like, oh, I can rent out all the bedrooms. I didn't know it was like a thing that people do. I did see an example of my dad doing that at some point, renting out bedrooms within a place that he was renting. But I had also thought that I was just real clever, like, oh, I can buy the house and then they can pay my mortgage. And now I'm gaining equity in the house and I'm not even paying for it. But then, so the main things for me were fully support a roof over my head, have my own vehicle because my parents had given me their truck to be able to drive around in. So I also bought a car at that moment, which I didn't know anything about finances. So I went ahead and I didn't take out debt. I financed the car, which I didn't realize were the same thing at the time. So I financed the car and I got a fancy car because I was like, well, if I'm going to have a monthly payment, I might as well just get the fanciest one I like. So I just picked out a fancy hybrid car that I really liked and had my house, had my car. And the final thing was to be able to have enough income to pay the bills and feed myself, pay tuition, things like that, figure out figure out student loans, which I'd heard plenty of advertisements for different loan companies on the radio. And so I already had some in mind, which were pretty predatory because I ended up going with a lot of private student loans. But through working when I worked in admissions, they hooked me up with financial aid where I learned so much more. And I never thought I would qualify for any financial aid, but actually I was able to get paperwork proving that I was divorced from my parents financially, which then qualified me for financial aid as being my own sole income provider with zero connection to my parents.
Yeah, you won't find too many 19-year-olds that don't want to come off the teat of the parent cash flow.
It's scary, but it's also not something I wanted ever to be a long-term thing, to be on the teat of my parents, as you said. I did not want... My parents love to tell me the story of when I was 2 years old, they once found me cooking my own eggs at the stove at 2 years old, knowing nothing how to cook eggs, just having seen it done before and guessing based on what I'd seen. And I'm sure I did a horrible job, but I did it myself. And I'm sure lots of mistakes were made, but I learned. And
Did you eat it?
probably. I bet there were shells in it and too. And but that's just evidence that I've always had a sort of independent mindset and always been driven, self-driven, that I don't want to have to depend on people and I want to figure stuff out on my own, even if it has to be the hard way.
If somebody doesn't have that self-driven mindset, can they learn?
I believe they can. I've tried to help coach people into it. I've definitely successfully helped some of my close friends who are also generally good students. I've been able to help guide them into like good careers and good degree paths, but I've not been able, for example, last summer, my cousin was struggling a lot with not knowing what he wants to do with his life. So I figured, hey, come live with me for the summer and it can be kind of like Noah's boot camp. And maybe he'll get inspired and learn like, oh, this is what it's like to live on your own and support yourself and live in your own apartment, pay your own bills, work your own job, be completely independent. And he definitely was inspired, but he still struggles with not knowing what he wants to do. But at the very least, I inspired him to try to at least follow a path. He is following his parents' path that they've laid out for him, but he's more determined to at least follow a path rather than just being floating and clueless. And
you helped him allay the fear.
yeah,
Got to see that it actually is possible to be out there on your own.
right.
And hopefully he'll make the correct decisions moving forward. And I hope that a lot of people will get some inspiration by that when they're going through or trying to make some of these same decisions that you've made, that, hey, look, it's going to be hard, but trust me, it's going to be worth it.
Something I think people make the mistake of with the American dream is that it's the land of opportunity, but people see that as the land of guarantees. And I think that's where they're completely wrong and off base. The reality check is it's the land of opportunity, meaning you have the option, the opportunity to do whatever you want if you're willing to work hard enough.
Work hard is the secret ingredient, isn't it?
And I'm willing to work hard enough for what is important to me.
Well, there's one more thing we want to conclude on this podcast. And we'd like you to let everybody know a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, I happen to be the biological son of Ryan Chiro.
So this is my son, and obviously I'm a very proud father. We wanted to keep that, basically wanted to keep it under wraps until the end of the podcast. However, it's something that, as a father, it's really a proud moment to sit here with my son and share this story with you. It's encouraging to me that young people can achieve success on their own in their life. They have support. At the end of the day, he has to do the hard work himself. And it's 100% up to him. And I'm very proud of you. Love you. And thank you for coming all the way out here from Silicon Valley to join my little podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Real People, Real Life. Our passion is to have real conversations with real people who've made it. Real people who've made it, who did it on their own terms. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, catch us on Twitter or X at RPRL Podcast and on YouTube at Real People, Real Life Podcast.